The wind had no mercy. Neither, apparently, did my family. I learned that quickly as the door slammed behind me, the lock clicking with finality that seemed louder than any argument we'd ever had. Snow whipped around me in sheets, stinging my cheeks and eyelashes, freezing every exposed inch of skin. My coat was inadequate, my gloves soaked, the cold seeping through to my bones as if testing the limits of my endurance. I pressed my hands to the door, willing it to budge, willing to hear any voice call my name, any sound of concern. But there was only silence. I shivered and stumbled down the porch steps, each footfall crunching through ice and hardened snow. The world around me was reduced to gray and white, a blizzard swallowing familiar streets and neighbors' houses in a soft, indifferent fog. My mind, in the midst of physical shock, began to fragment. How could they do this? The question echoed over and over, each repetition cutting sharper than the last. I had expected anger, maybe indifference, but not deliberate abandonment in the middle of a storm. Somewhere between disbelief and panic, I noticed her. A small figure crouched beside a pile of cardboard boxes, wrapped in layers that seemed as fragile as they were improvised. Her face, partially obscured by a hood caked in frost, turned toward me, and her eye was sharp, wary, assessing. She made no move, no gesture, only waited. Please, I said, my voice cracking. I don't know what to do. The woman didn't answer immediately. She leaned slightly forward, her gaze holding me in place as if measuring the storm against my will. Finally, in a whisper that almost seemed to be part of the wind itself, she said, "They rigged the house tonight. Watch this tape. I'll show you why they left you to freeze." She handed me a cracked, weathered smartphone, and for a moment I hesitated. Seeing it, feeling it, accepting it, it felt like stepping off a cliff. But there was no choice. I trusted her because the alternative was surrender to the storm, to fear, to the gnawing thought that my family had chosen my suffering for sport or convenience. The tape started. At first, it was subtle, almost imperceptible, the living room lights flicking in a pattern I didn't yet recognize, shadows moving in corners, locks clicking faintly. A muffled laugh reached me through the screen. Hollow and unfamiliar, my stomach tightened, the cold forgotten for a moment as horror settled in. This was deliberate. My family had plotted this. Every hesitation, every overlooked plea, every minor exclusion now fit into a pattern. Memories arrived unbidden, jagged and unpolished, the offhand comments at dinner, the quiet moments where I realized my presence was more tolerated than welcomed, the little lies that softened each slight until it became a subtle, constant pressure. Now, seeing it all confirmed, the memories were sharper, no longer softened by rationalization. Each one pressed on me with the weight of undeniable truth. I realized that rage, the kind I had imagined as a natural response, would not serve me. Shouting into the snow, storming back inside, or confronting them would not undo what had been done. Knowledge, though, that was power, quiet, undeniable, and mine. We sat together in silence, the wind moving around us in gusts that made the cardboard shiver. The world reduced to a small circle of survival. She did not speak again, only watched, letting the snow and the tape and the silence press their lessons into me. I began to see the contours of strategy, the possibilities for survival and leverage that didn't require confrontation, didn't require a show of strength. My body shook with cold, but my mind began to sharpen. The woman's presence reminded me that survival often required observation, patience, and careful timing. I tucked the phone into my pocket, careful to protect it from the storm. Its weight was physical, but its power was psychological, a quiet leverage I could carry forward. Night stretched on unrelenting, and I did not return to the house. There was no drama, no triumphant return, no shouting or vindication. Instead, I walked, placing each step carefully into the snow, letting the cold sharpen my senses rather than dull them. With each step, the storm became less an enemy and more a filter, separating survival instincts from panic. As I walked, more memories came. Small moments of betrayal I had ignored for the sake of keeping peace, subtle manipulations, the calculated absence of help in previous crises. Each memory pressed against me, but I observed rather than reacted. That night, I understood that enduring betrayal was not about fighting the betrayer, but about standing in the clarity of knowledge while others remained blind to it. By morning, the blizzard had passed. The streets were covered in a fragile layer of ice, glittering under the pale light, deceptive in its apparent serenity. I paused at a small cafe, ordering coffee and feeling the warmth seep into my fingers through the paper cup. The world seemed ordinary again, but I was not the same. The tape had shifted something fundamental, a quiet authority, an understanding of leverage and survival, a calm knowledge that no one could take what I had now claimed. Later, when I called the house to check on them, the line was silent, punctuated only by faint ambient noises. They pretended, as they always did, that nothing had happened. I said nothing, not because I forgave them, but because their normalcy could no longer touch me. The tape, the memory of that night, and my survival were mine alone. I had quietly regained dignity, not through confrontation, but through understanding and restraint. Days passed. I returned occasionally to the areas where the woman had stayed, hoping to see her again, to thank her properly. I never did. She had vanished as quietly as she appeared. leaving only a memory of her presence and the lesson she had imparted without words, that survival and dignity do not always require confrontation or revenge, but awareness, strategic restraint, and patience. Some nights, when the wind howls and snow drifts up against the windows, I remember the cold biting through my gloves, the crunch of ice beneath my feet, the whisper of the woman's voice. I remember the tape and the subtle evidence of betrayal, the realization that my family's power over me was contingent and fragile. That night, the storm had been an adversary, but also a teacher. I carry her lesson forward in small ways. In meetings, I observe more carefully, noticing subtle power plays. In personal relationships, I guard my trust not with suspicion, but with awareness. I have learned that authority can be undermined quietly, without spectacle, that leverage can exist without aggression, that dignity can be reclaimed without confrontation. The snow has long since melted, but the memory of that night remains. It is not a triumphant story, not one of revenge or drama. It is a story of survival, reflection, and quiet empowerment. I understand now that endurance itself is a form of strength, and that the lessons we learn in extreme situations, sometimes from strangers rather than family, can define the trajectory of our lives. I think of the homeless woman sometimes. I imagine her moving through the city unnoticed, a constant observer, perhaps teaching others without speaking. She gave me more than shelter or guidance. She gave me perspective. She showed me that even in betrayal, even when the world seems indifferent, one can maintain calm, claim subtle leverage, and walk forward with dignity intact. I never confronted my family. Not because I forgave them, but because confrontation was unnecessary. The power dynamic had shifted quietly. I no longer feared their choices, their indifference, or their deliberate cruelty. I carried my authority with me, subtle and unspoken, a quiet but undeniable assertion of self-preservation. Now, when I pass my old house, I do not feel the cold of rejection, only the memory of endurance. The blizzard, the tape, the woman, they are reminders that survival is not always about proving something to others, but proving it to yourself. I survived betrayal not with rage, not with spectacle, but with clarity, patience, and an understanding that my life and dignity are mine alone. Some lessons are learned in isolation, some in silence, and some from the most unexpected teachers. That night, the wind was cruel, the cold unrelenting, and my family absent. But I discovered the kind of resilience that does not shout, does not demand recognition, and does not rely on revenge. Quiet, careful, unwavering. That was my triumph. And when the world threatens again, as it inevitably will, I am ready, not with anger, but with the subtle power of awareness, the calm knowledge of leverage, and the quiet, enduring authority that comes from surviving and understanding without losing myself.